going to put together the Golden Oldies Mystery Quilt, okay? And it's very scrap friendly. But we're going to go over some of the instructions, and you need to have 1/4 yard pieces, 5 lights, 5 mediums, 5 darks. And it's a very scrappy, friendly project. So I want you to go through your stash at home, and we're going to figure out what goes well together. The instructions talk about pre-shrinking. I don't pre-wash. I have fabric that even though I've pre-washed it, it will bleed every single time. So anytime you wash, I want you to use a Shout color catcher, and it will absorb the excess dye that's floating around in the water. So you can avoid pre-shrinking by using Shout. And then the mystery quilt calls for full length with the fabric, 42-inch fabric. But if you want to use fat quarters, you're just going to adjust the numbers, okay? As in the number of strips that you need to cut. Now, as you go through your fabric, and I want you to find the quilt, the finished quilt's going to be about 48 by 60, has a border on the outside that takes 1.33 yards of fabric. If you want that wider border around there, okay? So I'm asking you to find a focal piece of fabric. That piece of fabric in your stash that when you see it, you say, oh, I don't know what to do with. Oh, that is so pretty. I don't want to cut that up. Could be your outside border. Should be at least 1.33 yards of fabric. So this is my focal piece of fabric. This is what I'm going to start with. If I like the colors in this, I can pull my scraps together and like the finished project, even though you don't know what you're going to make. Okay? So, as I'm going through my stash, now true white is a little bit much, but I sure do like the creams with it. Okay? Here's a green. Oh, I like that green with it, but that blue's way too bright. So this piece of fabric is going to help you read your scraps. So you just start throwing in your scraps. If you don't quite have enough 1/4 yard with the fabric, just add more. You need total 1.25 yards of your lights mixture, 1.25 yards of your mediums, 1.25 yards of your darks. Scrappier the better. You're just going to have fun. You can use plaids or stripes, but realize that those stripes are going to go sometimes this way in the block, sometimes that way, sometimes that way. So if you can just let it go, stripes and plaids are okay. Now when you'll sew these together, you're going to use, I use cotton thread. Typically we match the content of the thread to the content of the project. And if you use dual cotton covered polyester, the dual duty thread, that has a polyester core in it that as it goes through your machine, that polyester core stretches and the cotton fibers pop and causes more lint in your machine, and that polyester core will, over the course of 100 years, cut the fibers in your cotton. So we use cotton thread, cotton project. And typically a color that's going to kind of blend in. Not white, not black, but something that's going to kind of blend halfway in between. And now we're going to flip over to the other side that gives you the cutting instructions. The 2-inch, and it's going to tell you lights, mediums, and darks. The 2-inch strips are good to go, whether you're going to adjust whether you have fat quarters or with the fabric. But when it comes down to cutting the 3 7/8, in a perfect world, that's wonderful. You've cut exactly 3 7/8, 3 7/8 inch squares. You've drawn your line and sewn 1/4 inch on each side of that line. Your seam allowance is exactly the right amount. When you cut and open that up, your square ready to go into your quilt block is 3.5 inches. In a perfect world. My world's not perfect. So I use the triangle square up ruler from Quilt in a Day. She's going to tell you to cut your squares 4 inches. Just bump that up. 3 7/8 up to 4. Cut a 4-inch square. You're going to follow her instructions. When you seam allowance is not as fussy, you're going to lay this ruler, this 3.5-inch dotted line on your stitching line, trim before you've pressed, trim 2 sides, and you're cut exactly ready to go into your quilt. And then, even onto that, we can use the perfect little, it's by New Leaf Designs, a cling that's going to go on your sewing table that will show you where to match these up, and you don't even have to draw your lines. You can just start sewing those squares together. So, 2 helpful little hints, but as you cut, 2-inch strips are fine, but move down and cut your 4-inch strips of the others, and then after that homework is done, we'll have the next set of instructions to move you onto the sewing. Thank you for doing the Golden Oldies Mystery Quilt.